Hello, once again, my name is Lamar Harris, and we are here to talk more about stewardship. As we listen to the presentation from Rock Solid Finances, tonight we will learn more about how to save. Last week, we learned about budgeting, which is an important aspect of stewardship. This week, as we talk about saving, it will become clear that if you want to reach financial independence, you must have a systematic saving plan. Today's program will teach us how to save and where to save. Also, you will learn effective ways to start a savings program. Please listen to our presentation tonight as we use God's principles to learn more about stewardship.
This is a place that has always fascinated me. We're deep inside the heart of a bank in the vault. And principles number 3 and 4 have everything to do with what goes inside this vault. Does it belong to you and is it working for you? Or does it belong to someone else and it's working for them? Now, principle number 3 to having rock solid finances is a steward saves a portion of what God gives them to manage. Now, one question to address just right off the top is it actually biblical to save money? I mean, does the Bible have anything to say about that? And the answer is yes. Actually, Proverbs 21:20 says, a wise man saves for the future, but the foolish man, he spends whatever he gets. In other words, the Bible makes it clear that a wise man actually saves for his future. Now, there's 2 reasons to save money. And I want to look at each of these 2 areas, and I'm going to give you some rules of thumb that are tried and true strategies for how much you should be saving. Now, first and foremost, let's look at the first area. It's probably the most important. It's your short-term savings plan. And it starts with saving for emergencies. And the bare bone minimum that you need to have saved in an account right now for emergencies is $1,000. You need at least $1,000 in an emergency fund at any moment. Now listen carefully. It's vital that you save for the unknown, for the unexpected, for emergencies. So you have to have an emergency fund. To not have one, it's just plain irresponsible. Listen, life happens. Someone gets sick. A car breaks down, an appliance quits, the hose on your toilet breaks and floods the whole house. Emergencies just happen. And if you don't have $1,000 in an emergency fund, you're gonna be in trouble financially. That's why this principle is so important. Is it surprising that a car breaks down, that someone gets sick, that an appliance breaks? Well, no, we all know that. We know things like that are gonna happen, but we act surprised when they do. And that's mainly because we haven't prepared for them financially. So when an emergency happens, the first thing we think about is, I haven't even planned for that. It can be so different. So $1,000 is the bare minimum that you should have saved for emergencies. But you need to move beyond $1,000 to really be prepared. And here are some guidelines to help you. If you are in debt, other than a reasonable mortgage, you need to increase your savings, your emergency savings, to 1 month of your essential living expenses. That means that when you look at your budget, you ask, if I lost my job tomorrow, what expenses would I have to pay for 1 month? And that's how much you need to have in that emergency account. Now, if you aren't in any consumer debt besides your mortgage, you need to have a goal of having 3 months of essential living expenses in that emergency fund. So you need to build that up to 3 months. But before I move on, remember, the bare minimum in a short-term savings account for emergencies is $1,000. And that goal is going to take precedence over anything else I'm about to talk about. But the second area of short-term savings is around periodic expenses. Now, what do I mean by periodic expenses? Those are things that include things that happen throughout the year that are not really regular on a regular basis. Maybe they don't happen every couple weeks or every month. Some examples would be your real estate taxes. Those might happen twice a year, or your insurance premiums if they're not regular, or your vacations you take, or Christmas. Now listen, why does Christmas sneak up on us every year? Seriously, it's December 25th every single year. You know you're going to buy presents, so why act surprised? We should be preparing for that in advance. So here's an example of a periodic expense that you could put in a short-term savings account. Let's say you spend $1,000 on Christmas every year. You know that. That's about your estimate. Well, that's just over $83 a month that you should be saving. So do it. Plan for it. Now, here's why having an emergency fund and a short-term savings fund for periodic expenses is so important. Because if you don't do this, normally our only other alternative is to go into debt. And you'll soon find out why that's not an option for a biblical steward. Now, the second area that we need to talk about when it comes to savings is your long-term savings plan. That's really the second reason to save money. It's to save for your future hopes and dreams, your future savings for retirement or college. After an emergency fund, the goal here is to set aside a minimum of 10% of your income in savings. Now, here's the greatest piece of advice you may get out of this class. It's a rule of thumb that I've used and thousands of others have used that really works. It's a simple plan called 10-10-80. 10-10-80. Every time I get paid, I use this plan. I set aside the first 10% of my income, which we've already talked about, as my tithe. The second 10% I set aside goes into a long-term savings account for my future hopes and dreams, and then I live on the other 80%. 10-10-80. It works. Now, I want you to know that the key to savings, when you think about savings in general, it's not math. Listen, you will not save more money when you get the next raise, or when the car's paid off, or when the kids are grown. These are things we always tell ourselves. But listen carefully, you will only save money when it becomes an emotional priority for you. How many of you right now know you need to save money? I mean, how many of you would say, I know I need to save? Well, we all know we need to save, but many of us don't. Why? Because we have competing priorities. So a primary issue that we have to overcome is making savings an emotional priority for us. Now, if a doctor told you that your child was going to die, if you didn't save $15,000 for an operation your insurance wouldn't pay and you only had 9 months to do it, I would guarantee you every person could save that money in 9 months. You'd cut expenses, you'd sell things, you'd earn extra money, you would make it happen. In other words, savings would all of a sudden become a major priority for you. And I want you to know why savings should be a priority for you right now. The reason why is because the longer you wait, the less compound interest works for you. You might say, compound interest? What's this guy talking about? Yeah, compound interest. It's what Albert Einstein once said is the eighth wonder of the world. And when you understand how compound interest works and the power behind it, you'll understand 90% of everything you need to know about how banks and credit card companies actually work. Now, compound interest basically works like this. If I had $1,000 to save and I put it in a bank and I could earn 10% interest per year, that was the rate they were offering me, how much would I have saved at the end of year one? Well, that's pretty easy math. 10% on $1,000 earns me $100, which would leave me at the end of that first year with $1,100. But in year two, I don't earn interest on just $1,000. I now earn interest on $1,100. So that year I earned $110 versus $100 I only earned the first year. Now I have $1,210 saved. So in year three, I earn $121 in interest, and it just keeps compounding every single year. By year 10, I would be earning interest on $2,358 just by letting interest that I earn every year compound itself. And I haven't even invested another dime beyond my original $1,000. Now that may not sound like a big deal, but I promise you that it is. So to prove it, let's look at a real life example. Because sometimes a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. Let's take Amy. Amy's a 22-year-old college graduate, and she decides to save $300 a month. As she gets paid throughout the month, she just sets aside $300 into a retirement account. Let's say it earns 10% interest per year. And Amy decides to do this for 6 years. Then at the age of 28, 6 years later, Amy decides to start a family. She decides she wants to stay home with her children full time. So Amy doesn't save another dime for the rest of her life. At the end of those 6 years, Amy would have kicked in $21,600 of her own money over that 6-year period. But even if she doesn't contribute another cent for the rest of her life, by the time Amy turns 65, she would have saved $1 million. Now you might push back and say, how in the world does that happen? It's because of compound interest. And because Amy started early. And the earlier you start, the more compound interest can work to your advantage. But let's compare Amy now to Jason. Jason put off saving till a little bit later in life. He started saving by the age of 31. That's the first time he started contributing. He's still young enough to become a millionaire. It's still within his reach, but he's gonna have to work a lot harder to make it happen because he started later. While Amy only had to contribute $300 a month for 6 years to get $1 million, Jason would have to contribute the same $300 over the next 34 years to earn $1 million by the age of 65. Although Amy invested less out of pocket, only $21,600 over 6 years, Jason would have had to invested a cool $126,000 over 34 years for his money to grow and compound to $1 million versus Amy. 6 years of investing versus 34 years of investing. That's how compound interest works. And if you don't believe me, go do the math for yourself. And compound interest either works for you because you're starting early, or you're gonna have to do some work to catch up over time. So the key to savings for your retirement and for your future is to start right now. Don't wait, no matter if you're young or maybe a little bit later in life. Now you might ask, how should I invest? What should I do? What's the best advice? Well, the best advice I can give you is to simply put 10% of your income every time you get paid in either a 401k or an IRA into a retirement account. And for some of you, your employer will actually match your investment. And if you don't take advantage of that, that's just simply leaving free money on the table. So invest in a diversified mutual fund. Don't invest in things that you don't know or understand, because trust me, just because cousin Freddie said this stock's gonna go up or that piece of property is a good investment, doesn't mean it is. So in summary, as we talk about savings, your number one priority in saving money is to at least have an emergency fund of $1,000. Now you need to do that before you do anything else. And once you have that emergency fund set, then what you want to start doing is saving 10% of your income for retirement. Every time you get paid, simply set 10% aside in a retirement account. If you're a little bit older, you're going to need to contribute more than 10% because you need to catch up. And for you, if you're a little bit older and you know you haven't saved much for retirement at all, I would encourage you to save at least 15% or more. So start saving now so compound interest can work to your advantage. Let me ask you, what commitment do you need to make today? Let me challenge you with 4 of them. For some of you, you know you don't have an emergency fund, and the baseline requirement for savings is to have at least $1,000 in an emergency account. So you need to calculate, how much do I need to set aside every single paycheck so that I can build up to at least $1,000 in an emergency fund? Some of you may already have $1,000 in an emergency fund, but you know that you need to increase that to maybe 1 to 3 months of essential living expenses. How much per paycheck do you need to set aside? Calculate that out and commit to it. But for some of you, you already have an emergency fund, but you know that you need to start letting compound interest work for you for your future. And what I want to challenge you with is you need to set aside at least 10% of your income in a retirement account. Then lastly, for some of you, you know that you've put that off for a while now, and you're a little bit later on in life and you haven't quite let compound interest work for you the way it should, so you need to actually increase the amount that you save beyond 10%. And I would challenge many of you to start with 15% or more so that you can catch up. Whatever it is, commit to what God's telling you to do so that you can save for your future.
Another important lesson for your teenagers, after they've learned to earn an income, they've learned to give from that income that they've earned, they also have to learn to save. The Bible encourages savings. It says, go to the ant, The ant doesn't have a ruler or an overseer, and yet it saves a portion of all of its income. This is a difficult practice to master. Many people struggle with this. In fact, most Americans say right now their greatest financial need is to learn to save. So you want to teach your children at a young age to take a portion, after they've given to the Lord, take a portion of that income and to save it. We encouraged our boys to do this with an envelope system. We had clear plastic folders in a 3-ring binder. One was marked saving. They love it in that binder, but it works better than a piggy bank or something they can't see into, because they notice when it starts to get thick, they can see those bills piling up, and it really encourages them. And once it got to a certain level, we agreed to match the amount of money that they would put into a savings account at the bank. So they started out in an envelope, and as it got bigger and bigger, and they were required to do this with all forms of income, gifts from the grandparents, birthday money, allowance money, everything had to be divided. They had to learn to allocate those resources. And then the savings would go into the bank account, and then we would match it. And that encouraged them throughout their life to always save a portion of their income.
I know that we've covered a lot today, but I believe the foundation we talked about early on of understanding God's ownership over all that we have is the foundation you need to have rock solid finances. And what I want to do is I just want to leave you with the 4 principles we covered, but I want to give them to you in priority order, because I know many of you may be feeling overwhelmed and just saying, where do I actually start? What's the first thing I should do from everything that we've covered today? Well, here it is very clearly. Your number 1 priority from this class, if you're not currently doing it, is to tithe. So right now, if you're not currently bringing back to God the first 10% of your income, that's the most important thing you could do coming out of this class. It's absolutely your number 1 priority. It wouldn't be putting together a budget or saving more money or putting together a great get out of debt plan. Your number 1 priority from this class would be trusting God in your finances by honoring Him with the first 10% of everything He gives you. And the reason I want to reiterate that point is because if you're not tithing, God has no way of blessing your finances. And I know no better way to help your financial picture than to invite God to help you. And you can't invite God's help unless you're trusting His way of handling your finances. I've heard it said before, you can't expect the blessings of God unless you're following the principles of God. And without God involved in your finances, no budget, no savings, no get out of debt plan is really going to work. So I'm begging you to trust God first. I've seen God fix more people's finances by taking this step than any other piece of financial advice I could ever give you. Now, after tithing, your next priority of everything we've talked about is to put together a budget. You can't take any of the other steps until you've actually put together a plan to manage the money that God's entrusted to you. So that's your second priority. Your third priority is to put together an emergency fund. Don't even start a debt payoff plan until you have at least $1,000 saved. So if you haven't done that yet, that's your third step after tithing and putting together a budget. And fourth, your last step is putting together a debt payoff plan based on the debt snowball that we talked about. It's in that priority order that you need to work. Tithe, budget, emergency fund, and get out of debt. And when you do that, I can tell you from experience and from hundreds of life stories, you will have rock solid finances and never look back. And for many of you today, what it's going to take to make that a reality is surrender. You have to surrender and say, I'm tired of doing it my way. That doesn't really work. God, I actually want to do it your way now. One of my favorite stories from history took place during the Crusades that took place during the 11th through 13th centuries. During that time, soldiers and mercenaries who were going to participate and fight in the Crusades were actually required to be baptized. But because many of these soldiers came from far-off lands and from other areas, when they went to war, they hadn't been baptized. So as they were getting baptized, they did something that would seem very odd. They would take their swords, and as they were being baptized, they would hold their swords out of the water. In essence, they were telling God, I'm going to surrender everything to you. all control of my life, but you can't have my sword. I'm the one in control of this, and I'll do what I want with this. Now, I think for so many of us that are Christians, we really do want to give our whole lives to Jesus. We want to follow and trust him in every way. And so when we got baptized, that was our symbol of us dying to ourselves and saying, I'm tired of doing things my way. I'm dying to myself, and I'm going to live now for you, Jesus. But just like those soldiers during the Crusades, I think for many of us, we hold back. We tell God, God, you can have control, and I want to give every area of my life to you. But we take our wallets and we hold them out of the water and we say, but not this one. I want to do this my way. And what I want to challenge you with today is, will you give God control of your finances and do things according to his plan in the Bible? The principles we covered today were not instructions that you would get from a CPA. They're literally instructions from God's word. And I promise you, when you follow those, they are rock solid.
This program was presented to you because we know God wants us to seek financial wisdom and knowledge so we can be better stewards. If you use these principles to help you manage your finances, you will understand how much better you can organize every area of your life. As you gain control over your finances and use them according to God's principles, you will be amazed at how much you will be blessed in every area of your life. God wants us to be lenders, not borrowers. May God bless you as you work to become a better steward.